Back to Good Morning Tobago right here on Tobago Updates, guys. This morning we're going to get into some really interesting conversations as a number of things have been happening within the Tobago space. But this morning, as we start off our discussions on all that is happening, we have in studio with us this morning Dr. Vanus James. Good morning, Dr. James, and how are you?
Morning, Shenell. How are you doing?
It's always a pleasure to sit and speak with you. And I know you saw me smiling before the camera started rolling because the first thing that I thought about was the last time I heard an interview with you. And you said, in regards to the reshuffle, who is going to reshuffle Bali? You said, who is going to reshuffle the chief secretary? And to me, although it may come across as being a bit comical, it is indicative of your view of this current administration's performance. As we get into this morning's topic of discussion on the Reshuffle Tobago's economy, the crime situation, give us a bit of a background of where you are in regards to this current administration and their performance over the term.
Well, it's not indicative of my view in the way you put it. It's indicative of my view of the structure of the government. Because what you have is a chief secretary that can evaluate the work of the secretaries, and that's legitimate, and make a judgment as to who is performing and who is not. But you have to ask, if you're talking about good government, who will evaluate Fali's work and make a judgment as to whether he should be removed from his office or not. Elsewhere in the world, you see that judgment being made. Here, because the T.H.A. is designed as an executive power, and there is no legislative mechanism to look at his performance from the inside of the parliament, nobody can assess. Now, if you looked last year and the year before, the British did two removals, removal of Boris Johnson and removal of Liz Truss, because there is a system in place that could evaluate the Prime Minister's work and make a judgment that the Prime Minister is not fit for office on incompetence grounds or any of those, and therefore should be removed. Now, if you look at the Tobago economy over the last 2 years, it collapsed in 2022. Last year in Tobago, we lost 700 jobs, most of them higher quality younger people who left to go look for better opportunities elsewhere because the economy here isn't doing anything. 2 straight years of decline is almost a crime anywhere else in the world. But in Tobago, because you're guaranteed a transfer from Port of Spain, it doesn't seem to matter to the society. But you remember, economic performance is tied to everything else, including criminality. So we have to be extremely careful as a society not to gloss over what other societies worry about in 2 quarters. We allow 8 quarters to pass. And the media itself is not saying anything about it, to say nothing of the government, which doesn't have the courage to tell the people of Tobago what's happening. So under that, I asked the question, well, who would reshuffle Fali?
Great question. And during our previous discussion, you would have mentioned and emphasized on the importance of the Tobago Economic Development Plan. Can you tell us what the status of that is currently? Is there a committee in place that is working on that, or has that... Just tell us, what is
Well, you have to ask Fali that. I mean, I'm sure you have access to him. The media does. This has been 2.5 years now going into his term, and you're still guessing your way with respect to what is going to happen in the Tobago space. You're coming to the next budget, so that would be 3 budgets, no plan. And no engagements of the kind that would allow you to frame a plan anyway. So you're basically looking to run out the term, having guessed your way throughout. That's why I asked the question, well, who will reshuffle Fali? He's the Secretary of Finance, don't forget.
For now.
And Development.
For now, until the 1st of July. As we move forward, do you think that the preamble that usually takes place before the actual presentation of the figures in the budget is sufficient to give Tobago the understanding of some of the economic and development goals that the administration has?
And challenges, not just the goals, the challenges.
challenges
And if you dig yourself into this deeper hole, relative to 2021. It takes a society, the entire society has to be involved in understanding what's happening, looking at the evidence, looking at the possibilities, and working out where to go. Preambling budgets don't deal with that. What deals with that? And the country is not accustomed to it, but the mechanism you need is a system of government that allows all of the society to participate in determining where we have to go. That means you have to have a committee in the T.H.A. with oversight powers over the budget, and that committee would call in the society, would call in whole budgetary hearings, call in the private sector, call in the diaspora, call in the government in Trinidad, whoever is willing to come, and say, look, this is the circumstance, this is where we are, this is the decline we are experiencing, we want to turn it around. If you are a foreign investor, what do you think? What can you bring to the table? And so on. And you speak to the communities, you speak to everybody, and get them to put on the table what they want to do, what they can do, what help they need. That's how you have to handle it. And that's what matters. All talk in the budget speech doesn't make any difference. That's what will matter.
And what do you say to persons who say that suggestion is a bit too bureaucratic and often there isn't enough time to facilitate such consultation on the budget?
Well, look in the rest of the world. Democracy works in the US, it works in Britain, it works big countries, small, it works in the Cayman Islands, it works in Bermuda. Why won't it work? Why would anybody call a democratic process, a full information system, bureaucratic, when that's the basis of the data you need to make judgments? If you don't want that process, then what you're saying is you're willing to guess about the way to govern, and consequently you're prepared to make the mistakes, and hopefully you have a tolerant society that will allow you to bungle your way from step to step, getting things wrong and angering half the society every time. So this is not about bureaucracy at all. This is about putting a full, accountable, transparent and consensus building process in place to allow sound decision making. Let me clarify something for the society, because Trinidad needs to understand it too. Economies are very complex, dynamic processes, right? All of the critical things that are happening are interdependent things. And there are a whole lot of forces that no one person could master operating to drive the economy where it has to go. Because of that complexity, you need the full range of information. The public service will get you some, but only half. The bulk of the information that will help you to make some judgment rests in the hands of your stakeholders. And that's why you have to have both what the public service could bring and what the public could bring to allow you to make a judgment as to what of all of these fine-tuning things you have to do will work. You can't see that as bureaucracy. That's full information.
And how do you think this structure would be able to combat the frustration that leads to the brain drain that's happening in Tobago?
Well, if you have the evidence we have all across the Caribbean, not just, I've just finished running a full model of the national economy and the Jamaican economy. And what you see in there is that without sound decision-making systems, you get the experiences we're having in the country and in the region. You get a Jamaican economy that is underperforming. You get a Trinidad and Tobago economy that is not diversifying. And you get 12, 15,000 well-educated people, unemployed, out there looking for criminal ways to make a living. That consequence has to warn you. If you keep allowing for economic collapse in a place like Tobago, the inverse process will take place. Crime will surge because people are going to look for other ways to make a living because they can't stay hungry. Now, what that really tells you is that given the type of system you have, given the type of economy you have, the markets can't drive where you are, drive you from where you are to where you ought to go. So you need good decisions to move forward. Good decisions only come from properly constructed systems of government. And that's what you see around the world. That's what you see in the US, that's what you see in Britain, in Sweden, in Finland. Anywhere you look where the world is successful, there are 24 such countries. And that's what you see in all of them. Tobago can't expect, nor can Trinidad and Tobago. No one country could expect to make it by simply guessing. You've got to get the full set of information in your hands with all your players at the table, working out where to go and doing the things, doing their share of the work. Dictatorial systems fundamentally fail. The only reason China is making progress is that the society is so big that you have huge parts of the society that are outside of the reach of the Central Committee of the Communist Party. But, and you see some of that emerging in Africa as well, far away from the dictatorial processes. Well, Tobago is a small place. Once you have a dictatorship of the kind that you have in the T.H.A, all you reap from that is mistake after mistake after mistake, and you get the consequences we've seen in the last 2 years.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is even if we change administration, it is the structure of governance that has to change in order to see the type of economic development and
quite correct,
growth that we want to see.
Quite correct.
So when we take a step back, systemic change comes from constitutional reform.
Absolutely.
And we then begin the conversation on Tobago's autonomy.
Correct.
How does this fit into that discourse? And now we know the Prime Minister is going to, well, he says that he's going to be in Tobago on Thursday at the library for a public consultation, and I'm hoping that the conversation is brought forth. I'm hoping that you will be there as well, because I think that it is important for us to continue to put that pressure on the central government that Tobago is not letting up on the Tobago autonomy conversation. But explain to the public, how does the autonomy bill impact the suggested structure that you are putting forward? Because again, as you said, administration after administration, if the proper systemic structures of governance are not in place, we will always have a system of you call it dictatorial governance.
Yeah, mistakes, dictatorially generated mistakes. Let me answer it by making two observations. One is, it is correct, and the country has known that for 62 years, that we need constitutional reform. That's always been true over that period. Dr. Rory is right that we need it, but he's going about it the wrong way. We don't need Dr. Rowley to come to the library to speak to Tobago. We need the entire set of negotiators from the parliament. What Dr. Rowley should have done is work with the opposition. They told me they've only heard about this constitutional reform in the media just like I did. I asked them that in January in the opposition leader's office. The Tobago prime advisor to the prime minister, to the opposition leader, told me so. My Charlottesville girl, Jolene. Now, if you have a parliament set up the way our parliament is, and you don't get the opposition involved, you can't get any constitutional reform. That's why we couldn't get the two Tobago bills through the parliament. So what that really tells you is that Dr. Rowley is going about this, he's doing the right thing the wrong way, so he's doing the wrong thing. To do it properly, you need to set up a parliamentary process, a full, balanced parliamentary process. Forget about your advantage as the winning side. A balanced team, and maybe you bring the judiciary in to chair the processes and as a government process, the whole government, executive, legislature, judiciary, and so on. Bring everybody into the process and get the public involved in that conversation with public education mechanisms in place. Now, if you had that, it wouldn't be Dr. Rowley coming with a campaign mechanism in his hand, knowing that he can't get anything through the parliament. So I would say, first of all, he's doing the right thing the wrong way. And when he goes around and holds sessions in the library and so on, that looks more to me like a campaign event than a serious event trying to get real constitutional reform for the country. Now, how does autonomy fit into that? If you set up the government of the country properly, autonomy is automatically dealt with. Because what is autonomy really? The society needs to understand that autonomy, and Tobagonians as well as Trinidadians, autonomy is not about any shift from Trinidad or any hostility to Trinidad or Trinidad's hostility to Tobago. Autonomy is about a design of government that allows local issues, such as we assign Tobago under the 5th schedule, to be managed under law by the local government facility. So, in the case of Tobago and the T.H.A, Tobago needs lawmaking powers, not because you want to shunt the central government to one side, but because you are here, you are observing the facts of your case, and you are observing an executive council managing your affairs, and you need to make law in Tobago to ring-fence the behavior of the executive council. That's the real meaning of autonomy. When you have the power to make law, to control the behavior and guide the behavior of your executive. That's why the national government makes law as well. So that's the substance of it. And when you do that, if you want to do that properly, you have to give Tobago appropriate boundaries, not the 6-mile joke that we have. And those boundaries will have to guide budgetary allocations. But autonomy is also about something else. It's also about a properly structured senatorial device. The National Senate needs to be an elected Senate, not the appointed joke we have there, with a particular set of responsibilities having to do with spatial equity and equality of status and so on. And there needs to be inside Tobago a Senate for Tobago, of Tobago, to deal with spatial equity in the development across Tobago. If you look at Tobago, you know Tobago as a journalist, you would see going up and down. Lands from way behind King and Bonaccord. Roxborough complaining them is second tongue and they ain't going nowhere. Everywhere in Tobago I go, I hear that complaining. The only place I go not talking about being left behind is King and Bonaccord, and they're not happy with the workings of the community development process. So what you have to do is set up a senatorial device with the special responsibility to look out for equity of development opportunity. That requires boundaries to be defined and a formula on the budgetary allocation, which economists can tell you. Any economist almost around the world who knows what he's doing, or she, can tell you what that formula would be. And then you have a Senate that could tinker with the formula up and down according to equity requirements. 10% up, 10% down, as the case might be. That's the device that has to be put in place to deal fundamentally with autonomy. So autonomy for Tobago is fundamentally about designing of a strong, well-constructed constitutional arrangement for the country. Let me also remind you, Shenell, if Tobago is given something called autonomy, and the national government is poorly organized, then the autonomy won't give you what you need for Tobago. Because national decisions would make trouble for you forever.
Understood. But unfortunately, we have to kind of wrap up this morning's conversation because time ran away on us a bit. But we're going to get back a little bit to that reshuffle conversation. Do you think that the reshuffle that took place just a couple of days ago, do you think that it would have any positive impact on the performance of this administration?
Absolutely not. And there's a reason for that. There are two reasons for that. One, of course, is the fundamental problem that you have to grapple with is the collapse of the economic system. That's the 5th schedule is about the Tobago economy. Reshuffling could only deal with that if you understand that. The government, after 2.5 years, has not yet admitted to the people of Tobago that that collapse has taken place, first of all. Secondly, when I go around to the communities, talking to them about constitutional reform, and you know what they tell me? They're not happy with community development. They want to have their own capacity for self-determination. The division of community development, they say, isn't working for them. All the communities, 11 of them so far, have told me so. So if they're saying that, and you don't know that, because you're not engaging them that way, what is the point of changing the Secretary of Community Development, one person to the other, piling ignorance on top of ignorance? It won't make any difference.
If I'm not mistaken, during the campaign period of this administration, one of the ideas that came forward a lot on the campaign trail was that they would be allocating a specific budget to each community. That
I was
would
the
have been
economist who recommended it.
right. So what was the idea behind that, and why don't you think it has been implemented?
Well, you know, you could see people will agree with you on your science to win office, but they don't really mean it. So when they take power, you have to confront the reality of setting up Tobago for inclusive government, self-determination in the communities, strong community development programming, and so on. If your fundamental intent wasn't driven by the understanding of the nature of the problems we have, the need to wake up the community development potential, the economic potential in the communities. If you don't understand those things, it's easy for you to walk away from that, just as it was easy to walk away from the restructuring of the T.H.A. on the grounds that it's bureaucracy. Once you don't understand the nature of the problem you have, almost everything you choose to do will be a mistake.
But do you think they did not implement it because when they got into office, they realized that it was not financially feasible?
What is unfinancially feasible about it? You could begin to set up the communities with $1 million. You have 300 million of development funding. You're talking community development. You take 42 million, you have 42 villages. Take 42 million and start there. And show the country what you have in mind. Make the case for constitutional reform. We should have made that case since January of 2022 because it was known then and it's known now. And when you make the case to the government in Trinidad, you say we need constitutional reform and we need community empowerment, proper community empowerment as a part of that. We're starting the process in Tobago. You learn from us. Learn what we're doing with respect to our oversight committees and so on. We'll all make progress. You will gain, I will gain. That's the leadership that should have come from Farley and Watson to the extent that he remained relevant and they didn't mash up the party. So that's where we are now. We are now where we need a full understanding of the constitutional design required to move the country forward and, much more importantly, to move Tobago forward because Tobago is so critical to national development.
Okay. All right, guys. And that was Dr. Vanus James. Thank you so much, Dr. James. And then we'll take a brief break and we'll be back right after this.